welcome this evening to what is, I believe, the 24th time that I have met with members of the community in various groups over the past 18 months. This is the fourth community workshop that we've had with Winter & Company, our design guidelines consultants. We're joined this evening by Nori Winter, who's up here, and his associate Julie Husband, who's back in the back by the doors, and also members of the planning staff, our planning director Patrick Walsh, deputy planning director Margaret Wallace-Brown, and members of the preservation office are here this morning also, so thank you very much to them for coming. Really appreciate it. I want to get a couple things out of the way right away, and that is what we are and are not talking about at this meeting. If you are here because you are interested in repealing the Historic Preservation Ordinance, repealing the historic districts, or making any other changes to the Historic Preservation Ordinance that require council action, that is not part of the scope of this project, and we will not be talking about that tonight. So, if that's something that you would like to do, this is not the platform for you to have a talk about that. It's not part of our project. If that's why you're here and it's the only reason you're here, you might wish to adjourn to the front or the parking lot where you can exchange information with like-minded neighbors and start community organizing so that you can work with your elected officials to change the Historic Preservation Ordinance, but that is not part of this project. Okay, are we clear on that? Okay, the second thing I want to deal with is the editorial in the Leader newspaper, which included a whole bunch of misinformation because it commented and purported to report on design guidelines that the publisher and staff had not seen. So, will you be able to put dormers on your house? Yes, you will. Unlike what the Leader said. The Leader said you will not be able to put a rooftop addition. That's false. Yes, you will. The Leader said that you would have to count your front porch in your floor area ratio calculations. That is incorrect, also false. Let's see what else. The FAR calculation example they gave you was incorrect. The maximum FAR that you will have for a 6,600 square foot property in the Heights is not 2,320 square feet, it's 2,904 square feet. So those were, unfortunately, information that was published ahead of time without any visibility to what's in the actual design guidelines. I'm sorry if you were upset by that. I know we got some emails from people who were upset. Nothing we can do to control that, but I'm glad that if you came here to get the actual facts, that you did so tonight because this is where you're going to get them. I also want to address some of the misinformation and rumors that are going around on Nextdoor. Which, although Nextdoor is the place to get all the correct information, as you know, there are some things on there that are not correct. People who said you will not be able to encroach on the roof of the historic building, that's not correct, and you'll see that when we get to additions. Let's see, what else was there? I can't even remember now because there were a whole bunch of things that were not fact. But I hope that after tonight's presentation, if you still have questions, you'll feel free to give me a call or send me an email and get an actual answer that's based on what's really in the design guidelines. The design guidelines are available, and my cards are on the sign-in table, so at the end, and I appreciate that you will all be patient and get signed in tonight, please feel free to pick up one of my cards. There's also a question and answer sheet up there that does tell you how to make comments, how to reach me, what to do if you have questions, et cetera, et cetera. So all that information is on a handout over there. Okay, well, I see some familiar faces, which is awesome. How many people have not been to one of these meetings for this project yet? Raise your hands. Awesome. So for those of you who have not, thank you very much for coming. We really want you to be engaged in and participate in this process. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we got here. So for those of you who've been with us the whole time, please bear with me. But we will establish a foundation of knowledge for everybody so that we're all on the same page before we move forward. I do want to take just a moment, though, before we go any further, and I want to acknowledge the absence that we feel here tonight because Bart Truxillo, who was instrumental in the passage of the historic districts and has been a champion of historic preservation in the Heights, is not with us. I know that I miss his presence here, and I'm sure that all of you agree that he is missed here this evening. So thank you. Okay, here tonight, I'm your intrepid project manager. Nora and Julie will be jumping in probably toward the question and answer session. Doing that. You're welcome to, but if you don't want to eat up 64 pictures in your camera's memory, there's no need for you to do that. Okay, so where are we now? This project is a multi-part project. We're required by the Historic Preservation Ordinance that was amended in 2015 to create design guidelines for the 3 Houston Heights historic districts, East, West, and South. We'll also be creating design guidelines for the Norhill Historic District, the Woodland Heights Historic District, Freeland Historic District, and the Old Sixth Ward Protected Historic District. That will be completed toward the end of this year. Hi folks, come on in. Thank you. There are 2 seats right up here if you want to come sit up here. And then next year in 2018, we'll be doing design guidelines for Main Street Market Square Historic District and Glenbrook Valley Historic District, which is the 1,254 property mid-century modern ranch subdivision, which in its entirety became a historic district down by Hobby Airport. Okay, so that's how this is going to go. The design guidelines being developed is really based on community requests. There have been a lot of requests from both citizens, property owners, and the builder and architect community to have some more predictability in the design review process, which otherwise known as the Certificate of Appropriateness process. So if you don't know what that is and you haven't been part of that, I'm going to explain that a little bit. But this is in response to requests for this information. So what are design guidelines? Well, you know we have a historic preservation ordinance, and that has to apply to all 22 historic districts in the city of Houston. And they're all very different. You know, I just mentioned Glenbrook Valley, which is all mid-century modern ranch homes. Obviously, the design guidelines or the things that are applicable to the Heights and the types of homes you have here are not necessarily going to be directly applicable to a bunch of ranch houses, nor would they be applicable to the commercial buildings in Main Street Market Square. So the design guidelines help illustrate what the historic preservation ordinance means for each specific historic district. That's why we have them. And this is a tool that we use all over the country. Cities all over the United States have historic preservation guidelines for their historic districts, just like we will today. In 2010, the Historic Preservation Ordinance was amended, and at that time it required all new historic districts to have design guidelines either when they were designated or soon after. So we do have design guidelines on the books for Germantown Historic District, Starkweather Historic District, and in process for High First Ward Historic District. Okay, and this will add for existing historic districts. The 2015 ordinance amendment was the first time that the ordinance allowed for the design guidelines to be developed for existing historic districts, not just new ones. All right, the Certificate of Appropriateness process. For any of you who are not aware of this, if you want to make a change to the outside of your house, there are certain changes that require you to get a certificate of appropriateness if you live in a historic district. A certificate of appropriateness is like a permit. You can't get your building permits till you have it. And this is called the design review process or the certificate of appropriateness process. What happens is, ideally, as you're starting to plan a project, you would come talk to staff and find out what the rules are that would apply to your specific project, whether you want to add something or you want to change your siding or whatever it is. And the Historic Preservation Office planning staff can help guide you, and they're there to consult with you and provide information. That's their job. They also prepare the Certificate of Appropriateness application packets that go to to the Houston Archaeological and Historical Commission, and the HAHC, as we'll call them tonight, that's who is responsible for making those decisions. There are some things that are exempted entirely from having to have a certificate of appropriateness, and those are listed in the ordinance. There are also other things that can be reviewed by staff. So it requires a certificate of appropriateness, or I'm going to call it a C of A. That's how we get around not saying all those syllables. And a C of A would be required, but that doesn't have to go to the commission for the things that can be administratively approved. That means they can be approved by staff. And there's a whole list of those as well. So I know that there's been some talk on Nextdoor about horror stories. I know this is a problem for everybody, but I wanted to bring you the real data, because if you've been with me on this journey, you know I'm all about the data. That's what I do everything based on. So let's take a look at the past 4 years, and I apologize if you can't see, but for 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2016, the numbers of certificates of appropriateness have been fairly stable, with a high of 407 total C of A in 2013, but in the mid-300s for the last 3 years. Out of those, between 84 and 91% of C of A have been approved at the first hearing or administratively. So more than a majority, more than 2/3, a whole big chunk of them get approved the first time, no problems. Of the rest of them, even more get approved on the second hearing, which means somebody had to go back, make a couple changes, come back and reapply. And the total numbers are in the 90%. Okay, 97% in 2015, 91% past year. So more than 90% of C of A get approved on the first or second hearing. It's a very small number that get denied, a very small number, and most of them get approved the first time out, straight through. So even if you have not been through this process before, I know it can be daunting. I know it can be complicated. That's why we're doing design guidelines, to make it a lot easier. But even right now, almost everything gets approved. There's a very small number of things that don't. Okay, where are we in this process? We started by collecting a boatload of data. Data. I love the data. Nore and Julie were out all over the historic districts in June of last year, a whole year ago. They also collected a lot of data from the city's Geographic Information System, that's GIS data. That's the property data that we use to figure out footprints and lot coverages and all kinds of different stuff. A lot of that comes from HCAD, the Harris County Appraisal District, but not all of it. Some of it is also developed internally. So they got all this information so that they could see what patterns of development are present in the historic districts. Where are there more new houses? Where are the houses bigger or smaller? All kinds of things like that. They made a whole ton of maps. And a lot of that information shows up in the strategy paper that we published in March. That's still on our website, and there is also still a copy of it in hard copy in a binder at the Heights Library reference desk. So if you want to see that, you can still take a look at it. It's available. And a lot of the recommendations that were in that are now showing up in the draft design guidelines, which is on our website in PDF format, as well as, again, a couple copies at the Heights Library reference desk. So they collected all this information, they analyzed it. In the meantime, before we even got them on board, we were going through the contracting process. I was out talking to you. We had 4 meetings with Heights people in December, January, February, and April of 2015 and 2016, and we collected all kinds of information from you all. At the very first meeting, I told you what I'm going to tell you again tonight. You are not all going to be 100% happy with the result of this. There's just no way to make anybody completely happy. My goal is that you will be more happy than unhappy. About 60% happy is what I'm hoping for you individually. I think if we get more happy than unhappy, that's a pretty successful process when you're dealing with this many people. As we worked through additional community meetings with Norée and Julie, they presented a whole bunch of concepts, including all the data that they had gathered so far, to get your feedback on that. Were they making correct assumptions? Did they understand what was really going on in the districts? And then they began developing these models of different kinds of additions and different kinds of new construction. And there's a real method to this madness. I know a lot of people were saying, why are they only asking us about those things and not about some of these more qualitative questions? And that's because the numerical stuff is the really hard stuff to pin down. So all of that data that we gathered that turned into models, which were based on real numbers, we tested those in the December 2016 workshop, and then a survey went out in the mail to all property owners in January of 2017. And I really wanted you all to participate. I wanted everybody to participate. So we sent a letter saying the survey was coming. We sent a postcard to remind you the survey was coming. We hung door hangers on all your doors, so sorry if you got that and said, more trash. Because I know door hangers are not always the most popular thing. We put flyers in some of the coffee shops and places around the Heights, and everybody, every property owner got a survey, or should have gotten a survey, in the mail. Now I know we got 94 of them back for bad addresses. So you may not have gotten your survey, but we also put it online. So if you didn't get the survey, you should have still had the letter, and we were publicizing it in the Leader and other places too. You should have been able to go online and fill out the survey that way. We actually had about half of the people who returned this survey did it online, and about half did the mail version. Out of a total of almost 3,500 surveys mailed to the various districts, which you can see up here, not just the Heights, but also Freeland, North Hill, and Woodland Heights, we got about 25%, 26% response, which for surveys is really, really high. I mean, I can tell you if we could get that kind of turnout for elections, we'd be happy. You know, if you look at what just happened in May, right? So 25% for a survey is really, really strong. And the really interesting thing about the survey data is that, you know, all those questions they were asking you about, what do you think about this edition? What about that edition? What about this other edition? It really very clearly, in almost every case, really broke out very cleanly, where we were able to say, this is okay, okay, not okay. You know, where people clearly said, this is too big, it's taking up too much of the lot. Now, interestingly, we are also able to determine things like people were okay with a 2-story house in a 1-story neighborhood rather than a 1-story house that was gigantic and covered a whole bunch of the lot. And I know from talking to you all that drainage has been an issue up here, stormwater management, and that's not part of our purview, but we did hear that a lot, and we saw that reflected to some extent, we think, in the survey responses. So we got all these surveys. There was a tremendous amount of data analysis that went into those, and they were able to use that to sort out some of the information you'll see in the design guidelines tonight in terms of the measurable standards. So here's what's going to happen. I am not going to walk you through this document section by section. You are all smart people. You can read a document. If you have any questions when you're reading it, please call or email me. I'm happy to answer. As those of you who have been involved in the process know, when you call my office phone, it forwards to my cell. And I've talked to you in the evenings, on the weekends, on my vacation, while I'm driving. If I can pick up your call, I always will, and if I can't and you leave me a message, I will always call you back. So you can always get me to answer questions. We're going to take your comments on this draft through the 30th, through the end of the month, but there will be another draft for you also to review, and that's the one that we'll be delivering to the city no later than August 7th. That's our deadline. It's required by ordinance, and that's the one that we'll be taking forward 2 public hearings with the Historic Commission, and then with Quality of Life Committee of City Council, and finally City Council. So you will have other opportunities. We'll have it published. You'll be able to send comments in. This is not your last time to comment on this document, okay? But the comments on this draft are due by June 30th. And please send them to me in writing. Please do not call me, and hope that I can write really fast and capture your thoughts accurately. I do my best, but it's really better to come in your words. Okay, and we're going to talk about what's in the design guidelines. We're going to talk about the process for making comments, and then at the end, we're going to have questions and answers. This is like batting practice for me. Nora is going to help. But again, if you have issues with the preservation ordinance or historic districts in general or anything like that, for those of you who came in after we began the meeting, we're not talking about that tonight. I will be happy to take any of your questions on the design guidelines. Okay, so how is it organized? The design guidelines document is organized in 9 sections. Some of these are more informational. And what we're really hoping to do here is to help you get the kind of the background foundation of knowledge that you'll need to understand what comes in the later chapters. So we do have, this little introduction. Of course, you always have an introduction, but then section 2 is really important, preservation fundamentals. This talks about concepts like integrity, significance, a period of significance, contributing and non-contributing classifications, and how we come up with those and how they work. So it's really important that you look at section 2, preservation fundamentals, because we're going to be talking about those concepts and referring to them in these later sections. We'll have a little bit of information about the historic districts, and that's really number 1 because we're required to do that by ordinance, but number 2 because we want you to understand what's in the historic districts so that when we start talking about character defining features, you will have already read that we have a lot of craftsman bungalows in these historic districts, and here are the character defining features of a typical craftsman bungalow. Those are the things we want to preserve. So section 3, also important. It's a lot shorter. You probably know a lot of that information already, but we want you to have that as well. And it's for your reference as well as to learn maybe a little something new about your districts. Okay, section 4. This is where we really start getting into the actual design guidelines. Section 4 deals with exterior alterations to contributing structures. Section 5 is additions to contributing structures. If you have a non-contributing structure, those alterations and additions are all together in one section. That's section 6. Section 7 is all about new construction. Section 8, relocation and demolition, which you can do. There are just rules for, whether or not you can do it depending on what kind of property it is and how that works. And then section 9 are some additional resources. So we have links to the very helpful pages published by the Texas Historical Commission. The National Park Service publishes a whole bunch of things called preservation briefs. And these are technical publications, but they're written for a lay public audience. And they explain things like what happens to wood siding when you put too much paint on it, and how to take care of masonry and clean it appropriately without blasting all of the mortar out of your mortar joints and things like that. What's appropriate for a roof. It's all, I think there are 45 or 50 preservation briefs now. They are super helpful, they're free, they're available as PDFs, and so we have the link there for those, as well as the link to the Secretary of Interior Standards for the Treatment of Historic Properties. That's not a document that binds us, but it really represents best practices in historic preservation as they've developed over the past 50 years throughout the United States. We also have, we have a glossary in there as well, and then we'll have the inventory for the district, which we're also required to provide in this document. Do you have a question right now?
Yes. Define contributing and non-contributing structure.
I will get to that. I will get to contributing and non-contributing when we get to it in the presentation. Is that okay? Sure. Okay, thanks. All right. So in this first anytime we have a first section, you're going to see this kind of page. That's how you know it's the new section starting. And we also have a table in here that explains how to know which sections you need. The PDFs are all going to be available individually, so when you get ready to do a project, you can just open the ones you need, and this table tells you how to figure out which ones you need for a specific project. Of course, that's in the design guidelines. Then each of the design guidelines themselves are formatted the same way. There's a heading that identifies the topic. There's some explanatory information that will help you understand what comes later. Then there's the design guideline itself, and those are numbered. For your reference, and also so when you're talking to staff, for example, if you have a question about design guideline 4.3, you can ask them about that number. You don't have to say it's on this page and it's the fourth one down, it's the one that says X. And then generally, under the design guidelines, there are bullet points that explain it more, and we have tried to make them very clearly written. If you do see somewhere you're just not sure what that means, please let us know so we can clarify those things in writing. And then we do have, where we can, graphics, photographs, or illustrations, and we've identified appropriate things with a check mark and inappropriate things with an X. All right. So I'm not going to go through the entire fundamentals part of section 2, but what I can tell you is we have a couple different concepts that are really important. Integrity is one of them. Integrity means, does this building or resource retain the character-defining features that it had when it was built or when it achieved significance? And that ties into this idea of significance. And this also feeds into contributing and non-contributing structures. So, hey there, come on in. The way that a historic district designation works, you do a survey of the historic district and you identify what's in it, and you figure out what is the period of significance for this district, and also why is it significant. In the case of the Heights, it's significant because it represents the way an independent city developed. The Houston Heights was independent from 1892 to 1918 when it was annexed to the city of Houston, and it retains the layout that it had primarily since that time. This period of significance goes through 1947 in the designation that made it a local historic district. And so if you have a building that contributes to the reasons why the district is significant, for its architecture, for its patterns of community development, for its association with important people in this area, etc., and it was built within the period of significance, and it has not lost its integrity by having too many inappropriate alterations made, then it's considered contributing. And any of those things in the reverse can make it non-contributing. So if it was built outside the period of significance, if it was built later, it would be non-contributing. If it maybe has had a lot of alterations made that have destroyed its integrity, and now its key character-defining features are no longer present, that would make it non-contributing. But here's something that's important to know, and I know it's technical, and that's why we have a whole section on it in the design guidelines to explain this stuff. You can have a house that is non-contributing because of alterations that, if reversed, would make it contributing. So non-contributing status is not an either-or permanent thing, and likewise, neither is contributing status. If you have a contributing property and someone makes a whole bunch of inappropriate alterations, or maybe it's a lot of little alterations and individually they wouldn't be that big of a deal, but together they destroy so much historic material that the property loses its integrity, then a contributing property can also become non-contributing. And that's really what the historic district designation is designed to avoid, because each house in the district contributes in some way to the character of the district overall. It's a collection of these contributing buildings. And so if you start chipping away at them individually, you might say, well, it's just this one house, but it affects the character of the district as a whole. And that's kind of the basis on which historic districts are designated and managed.
You mentioned the period of significance a few times, and I think there's a reference in the guidelines. It begins in 1891. But where's the end of it?
Sure. The period of significance for the Houston Heights districts ends in 1947. And that's how it was set up when the designation was adopted by City Council. For each of the different each of the different historic districts, they all have the same one. And that's based in part on a National Register of Historic Places multiple resource area designation that was done in the 1980s, I think. So that's how that worked. I have a question back here. Okay. There were two people, and one said, I didn't understand what you just said, and the other had the same comment or a different comment? Okay, let me do that. I don't understand what you just said first. What specifically did you not understand that I just said? Because I've been talking a lot. And I want to answer your specific comment. Are we talking about contributing buildings or period of significance?
What do you do with the historic district? I didn't understand. It sounded very complicated.
Oh, okay. Well, I apologize for that. So the question was, why are we talking about historic districts, or how do historic districts become designated? So we're talking about, the gentleman had asked, what is the period of significance for the Houston Heights historic districts? When you designate a historic district, you identify the criteria for its significance, why it's significant, why you're designating it, and then you identify a period of significance during which those conditions either came into existence or were present. The period of significance for the Houston Heights historic districts begins when this master plan community was established in the early 1890s, and it continues through 1947. And so if you have a building that was built after 1947, because that's the end of the period of significance, it doesn't matter. Okay, all of that information is explained in the design guidelines.
What's changing?
So, okay, if you go out that door, my cards are over by that door, and you can pick up a card and call me with your specific questions, and I'll be happy to talk to you as long as you want. No, you're fine, you're fine. That's not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. Thank you very much for coming. I do appreciate it. Oh, get my card. Urgh. Okay. Well, it's on the website. He can find me. I'm sure he'll ask one of you, and you can tell him where to get me. Sir, in the red shirt.
I have a two-part question. So, is this something that we can contest if we fall outside of that period of significance? One, and two, if you mentioned different, improvements that don't fall within the historic district's guidelines are made to the house, that don't fit within that criteria. What I'm asking is if we meet or we don't meet those guidelines, the criteria fall outside, can they be contested to have our contributing structure changed to non-contributing?
Okay.
The reason I ask is because
No, just let me answer the question. Okay. So the question is, number one, well, I think your primary question is, can I get my classification changed from contributing to non-contributing, right? This is my secret superpower. Somebody will ask a question, it's really long, and I sum it up for all of you and the cameras. So thank you. There is a mechanism in the Historic Preservation Ordinance for, I believe, contesting your classification. Is that correct, Margaret and Diana? Or is it just for de-designation?
The commission can, in fact, vote to reclassify.
Okay. Okay, so there is a possibility that you can make a case to have your property reclassified. That is something that goes to the Historic Commission, and it's explained in the ordinance, the steps that you have to take and what evidence you have to provide to make that case. So that is.
district, I have been in with them, and I was
Okay, so he was told that that wasn't possible, but the ordinance was amended in 2015, and that's one of the things that you're able to do. I don't know if it was in the past. Okay, I really want to take all your questions, but I also really want to get through this presentation. So if we don't mind, I'm going to just go through, and please hold your questions, the rest of them for the end, and then we'll get to everybody, I promise. Okay, we talked about character-defining features, and we do have some graphics in the design guidelines to help you identify what those are, where they're found on different kinds of houses, so you'll have that information as well. And then the other thing that is really important, and it keeps coming up in the design guidelines, and you'll see it again and again, is the idea of cumulative effects. And what we're really saying here is that you might make a change, and that might not be a very big change. But the accumulation of little changes over time, like we were saying, can lead to the loss of integrity for a property. So, it can be okay to do, things, and maybe because everything is looked at on its own merits, your neighbor may have been able to make a change to their home that really hadn't had a lot of changes. But if another person, their home has had a lot of changes made, the same project might be a little trickier because so much historic fabric has already been lost, for example. So every project is considered on its own merits based on that property and that specific proposal. Okay, in the design guidelines, you're going to see this sequence of work come up again and again and again, and that's because this is what we want you to do. Number one, preserve what you've got through good maintenance. Please keep your siding painted, fix damage. When it comes up, ordinary maintenance repair is not required to have a C of A. Replacing in-kind materials is not required to have a C of A. If you can't maintain, or you haven't been able to maintain it, or something bad happens and you need to fix something, that's great. You do have to have a C of A for big repairs that are not ordinary maintenance and repair. But you want to fix things with like materials, so don't patch in your wood siding with a piece of hardy plank. Use the same profile, et cetera, et cetera. You can fix rotten wood with an epoxy consolidant. You don't have to replace an entire window because you've got this much rot in it. So you want to repair rather than replace. If, however, something is damaged so much that you can't fix it, and you have to replace it, you want to replace the very smallest amount you can. So if you've got this much siding on the side of your house that's damaged, that doesn't mean that all of the siding on your house has to go, okay? And then finally, if something is lost, let's say you have a porch railing and your child who just got their driver's license has driven into it and destroyed part of the railing, the balusters, not that my child who just got a driver's license would ever do that. You can replace those balusters. You want to base those on either existing examples of the same thing that's already on your house, like porch railings, or evidentiary documentation. So if you have pictures of what the porch used to look like and maybe somebody had altered it in the past and you want to restore it, you want to base that on documentation, not supposition. All right, so this is how the kind of sequence of events works that we want to follow. All right, so I'm going to kind of walk you through a couple of the sections and just give you a little bit of preview, and then we're going to talk about the measurable standards, which I know are probably on everybody's mind, and we're going to go through a couple case studies for calculating floor area ratio, calculating lot coverage, and if you've done both of those things, what that means for the size of an addition. All right, so exterior alterations to contributing structures takes this form. It's what we showed you before. We've got the heading, historic building materials, and then we talk a little bit about that before we get into the qualitative design guidelines. We've got qualitative design guidelines and quantitative measurable design guidelines. Everything that has a number associated with it is quantitative. Everything that does not have a number and requires interpretation is qualitative. Now I know that interpretation is part of the reason we're here tonight, because people interpret things different ways, and so for this qualitative design guidelines, we've tried to provide you with enough structure to help you interpret the same way without having to try to think of every possible scenario that could come about in thousands of properties. So there will be some subjectivity and interpretation still required in the qualitative design guidelines, but we've tried to help make that as consistent and predictable as possible. Okay, I do want to say something about windows and matching light patterns on an addition. So one of the things that we struggle with in the Historic Preservation Office sometimes is an addition that really is visually very dominating over the historic house. And really your historic contributing structure should be the primary thing on the property. So if you, for example, want to match the light patterns of your existing windows with these windows on the addition, you can do that as long as you're differentiating the addition in other ways. It's one of the many options you're going to have for doing that. So I know there's been some talk about windows from one of our commissioners in particular, and I do want to tell you that that will be an option for differentiating or not differentiating the addition. I also want to address dormers. We would love for you to finish those attics, make that additional living space based on the footprint that you already have. Dormers are one way to do that, and we've provided a series of these graphics, and you'll see these for additions as well, where we're showing you what configurations of dormers are appropriate and which are not. So you'll see some check marks. The big thing is you want to avoid the kind of configurations that were not historic or that really kind of intrude on the front of the house, because that's where most of the contributing or the character defining features tend to be. So we really like to have most of those changes a little bit more toward the back of the house. So for example, a dormer that's right up front, or a dormer that cuts into the existing ridge line, that's not appropriate. But if you want to have a big shed dormer off the back of your house, if your house accommodates that because of the roof, or even if you want to have a fairly large dormer or two dormers on the side of a house, the conditions under which those are appropriate are all spelled out in the ordinance, so you'll be able to do that. Okay, we're also going to talk about additions. Now I'm going to go through some of these graphics just so you can see, but we're not going to spend a whole bunch of time on every single thing because you can read about them yourselves. But I do want to just give you a sense of what's in the design guidelines. Now we have additions for contributing structures and additions for non-contributing structures. We're going to just glance through those so you can see how they're different. So for contributing structures, in section 5, again, we have these qualitative design guidelines, and then we also have quantitative standards. And I do want to point out this graphic, which tells you a little bit about the location of changes. Things that are toward the back of the house are going to be, you're going to have more flexibility because that's where fewer of your character defining features for that building will tend to be. And of course, the very back wall of the house, if it's not available or visible from the street, for example, if you're on a corner lot, that we don't regulate that at all. So there's a graphic in here that explains how location makes a difference. So you are going to be able to do rooftop additions. I do want to point out that when you get to the document, this is on page 5-22, and these pictures and these pictures are switched. So this is the one that's okay, and this is the one that's not okay. And we'll be making that change, but I just want to tell you right now so that when you see the difference, you won't be like, ah, you said it was going to be fine and now it's not, pitchforks. So do understand that was a mistake and is getting fixed. But you can see that these pop-up additions are going to be allowed. The important thing is to preserve the existing four corners of the house, of the roof. Okay? But coming up over top is going to be allowed. Then also, here are just some really, really big ones that are too big because it eats up too much of the existing roof. Addition combinations. This is something that is over the top of the roof and extends off the back. You'll be able to do that, as you can see. Some of these are actually pretty large, depending, and you can also do like a little back addition and a side addition. But again, here's one that really cuts into a large amount of the roof, and that's not going to be okay. Okay, additions to the rear. The important thing again is that we preserve those four corners to the extent possible. So let's here look at these site plans. You can see here that the four corners are still visible. This has a little connector. This one connects to the back of the house, but it's offset a little bit. And then here's another one with a two-story connector in this case. And then again, another two-story addition, which is set in just a little bit to preserve those four corners. This one is not okay because those corners get erased. And this is also removes the four corners, but it's also kind of big and also a little bit bigger and not okay. Now I know some of you are thinking, well, holy cow, there's a lot of stuff that we're not allowed to do. Well, here's the thing, you weren't allowed to do that stuff anyway, but you didn't know exactly what it was because we didn't have pictures. So you would go to make out your certificate of appropriateness. Your builder would say, I think we might be able to get this to fly. Staff would have to guess at what they thought the commission would approve, and then the commission would have to get together and sort it out and try to decide if it was okay or not. So what we're trying to do is eliminate the unpredictability of that process and make it easier for everybody involved. You will be able to do some side additions. Again, they have to be toward the back and relatively small scale, but you know what? If you need that extra couple feet for your laundry room, you're going to be able to do that. Okay, and here's some big side additions that are not going to be approvable. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So the side carport, I found it interesting that was not okay for the guidelines, given that there are tons of examples of that on older, I don't know the dates of the houses.
It's because it's right up front.
But it's consistent with other homes in the neighborhood already.
If you have a comment about that and you have specific addresses you want us to take a look at, will you send me an email, please, and let me know which addresses those are so we could take a look at that condition? That would be helpful for me, and I can actually respond to that. And I will also, here's the thing that's going to happen. When you send me all your comments, I'm going to remove your identifying information, but I'm going to publish your comments and our responses to your comments so that everybody can see what everybody said, and you'll be able to see how that's reflected in the next draft. Okay, so if you will send me that information, that would be super helpful. And thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate it. Okay. Additions and alterations to non-contributing properties. These, again, are houses that are newer, that were built outside the period of significance, or that have been changed significantly, or for some other reason have been classified as non-contributing. We have some different addition options. This just shows the kind of starting point. This would be a little house that we would call a minimal traditional house. This is typical of the small house movement of the 1930s and 1940s. It was something that was promoted by the FHA to enable home ownership, both before and after World War II. And you see a lot of these small houses that are traditional in shape and minimal in ornamentation. And that's how we get the name minimal traditional. And I know some of you look at those and you think, just a little house. I can tell you that before I got my education in historic preservation in grad school at the University of Texas School of Architecture, I used to drive around my hometown in Dayton, Ohio, and I was like, all these little houses. And then I went back after I had learned how to look at them, and I was like, oh, holy cow, look at all these little Tudor buildings. I had no idea that that's what I was looking at. But that is what we have here shown up here in this top example of the beginning condition. So you could, for example, put a little addition on the side, and here's where a larger porch has been added. This builds up over, but here's something that is just super out of scale, and it's destroyed a little bit more of the house. So trying.
What's the difference between the third one and the fourth?
Yeah, so the difference between the third one and the fourth one is primarily the roof form. It's a shed roof that's not typically found in this district. And so when you see the section on roofs in the design guidelines, a gable roof is okay. A hipped roof, which is the kind that slopes down on all four sides, that's also okay, that's traditional. But those shed roofs that are more contemporary would not be compatible with contributing buildings. And that's primarily why it's got that shed roof. And that also pops the front up a lot taller. That's an excellent question. Well, okay, so let me repeat your question so everybody can hear. The excellent question that this gentleman just asked is, if it's already non-contributing, why does it matter if it is compatible with contributing buildings in the district at all? It's already non-contributing. And the answer is that all of the buildings in the district still have an effect on the character of the district overall. And the fact that it's non-contributing won't change, but we don't want it to become even more non-contributing and start to be even less compatible with the district. So there are a lot of things that you can do. Quite frankly, if you're dying to have a shed roof, on the top of your house, and you can't find your way to, making that a gable, I think maybe we can talk about, maybe you could come in, we could talk about why that's more important to have a roof that matches, but that's how we've laid it out in the design guidelines. Oh, that's a great question. So, number one, you have to get a certificate of appropriateness to make this change. Number two, you have to do what you say you're going to do in the certificate of appropriateness, or that's a code enforcement violation. And our planning friends can tell you what the penalties and things like that are, but you can have to remediate that. So you don't want to try to be sneaky, and not that you would, sir, certainly. But if someone who is clearly not here, not a member of this august body, were to try to be sneaky in that way, the city does have penalties built into the historic preservation ordinance to prevent that. Yes, sir.
Oh, yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this presentation. It's amazing. It's wonderful to hear this, and I grew up in Cleveland, underneath.
Oh, I'm from Tip City.
Oh, really?
Yes, we're practically neighbors.
My sister's a professor of architecture also.
Okay.
So, quick question. I'm looking at a piece of property that has a contributing structure, but then it has an ultra-modern contemporary structure on it. And the modern contemporary structure, when it was built, or when it was architected, it was designed to have balconies that could later be closed in. Now, indefinitely closing in those balconies is harmonious with the non-contributing structure, but I don't see where it would fit into this application.
So this gentleman is asking kind of a design review consultation question. He's asking about a specific property regarding its condition and a potential change that he may or may not want to make in the future. That is not a question for me. That's a question for the planning staff.
Well, I guess maybe let me rephrase the question. I don't understand how that would fit into this design guide.
So that would be an exterior alteration. These are additions.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it would be an exterior alteration, so it would be in a different section. But that would still be something where you would want to go talk to the planning staff. I will tell you right now, because I know you guys call me and ask me these questions, and I'm happy to have every single one of your calls, even if it's about Can we make culverts or turn our culverts in drainage issues into culverts, whatever. I'm best friends with the public works engineer now because I've answered a lot of your public works questions and learned a lot, so thank you. But if you have design review consultation questions, I have this property, can I do X? Those are questions you need to ask the planning staff because they do design review. I do project management and community engagement. So I would not be able to answer those kind of questions, and I apologize. I would love to be able to help you, but I'm not your best source of information for those.
Question.
Yeah.
When you say planning, you go to the planning, you mean historical planning or you go right to planning to get your permits and various?
So this gentleman asked, when we need to consult with people, and I say the planning department, who do I mean? There are planners within the Historic Preservation Office, and those are the people you talk to when you want to learn about design review. Their planner of the day, there's always somebody who answers the emails and answers the phone on a daily basis, and that's that I can give you that phone number if you'd like, and there's it's historic preservation at houstontex.gov, 832-393-6556. But you can always reach somebody there, unless they're already on the phone with someone, in which case you leave your information in a message and they'll get back to you. But that's who you talk about for design review. Hang on just a second, this gentleman.
One question on COA. What do we do? Do we need a COA if after a major storm, we have major damages, and we've got to get something repaired now and don't have time? Can we do a minimal repair job and then come back and...
There's another excellent question by this gentleman. We actually got this last night at the advisory committee meeting from the representative from the Houston Association of Realtors. If there is a major storm, which of course we have brewing in the Gulf right now, and we have a lot of damage done, how do we handle that? So if you've had a natural disaster, you can reconstruct your home as it was, and that's permitted under the ordinance. If you were to, again, not anybody here, but be someone who wanted to take that opportunity to do something completely different, that would require a certificate of appropriateness. But fixing your house after a storm or a fire, something that you did not create, not that that ever happens, that's permitted. Okay, and that's an excellent question. Thank you very much. There was, I believe, a lady over here who had asked a question. Oh, yes. All right. Is everybody ready for the phone number and the email for the planner of the day in the Historic Preservation Office? Okay, that number is 832-393-6556. That's the historic hotline. And my pals are there answering the phones, taking your calls. You can also send an email to historic preservation, all one word, all lowercase, at houstontx.gov. That's historic preservation at houstontx, all one word, .gov. Hang on just a second, Jeremy. All right, did everybody get that? Okay. This gentleman back here?
Yes, can you go away and all the properties that are listed as potentially contributing or automatically emergency contributing at a certain point within the last year or two?
Actually, it wasn't within the last year, but I don't have that answer, but our historic preservation officer will be able to answer that, and we'll do that after the presentation, okay? Jeremy?
The current guidelines, there's a shall approve section.
Yes.
You now have a mandatory approval section, which I'm assuming is a similar concept for, the mandatory approval. Do those, like rear addition that goes straight back and meets the roof line and sidewalls and everything, does it still have to meet the floor area ratio and lot coverage? Because it doesn't really say that in here.
Let me repeat the question, and then I'm going to actually have to defer that because I'm not sure the answer, or I'll have to find it out for you. So this gentleman asked, there is a section of the Historic Preservation Ordinance under administrative approvals which says that if you meet the conditions listed in that section, that your addition will be approved. And it's come to be colloquially known as shall approves. It's listed in the design guidelines as mandatory approvals, and then it says also known as shall approves right under that. And what we try to do here is illustrate what those look like. Now, the question was, do those still have to meet FAR? And I don't know. It doesn't say, and so we need to figure out the answer to that question and get back to you. But that is, would you please send me an email with that question exactly, and I know you're typing with your thumbs right now, thank you, that way I can answer your question specifically, and then when we publish all the comments, everybody will have access to that answer. But we'll have to find that out. If you guys would not mind, I'd like to just go through a couple more things and then get to some of these, because I think we may answer some of your questions just going through the presentation. So bear with me, and I'm happy to answer all of your questions. Okay, so what I do want to talk about is the design standards, these measurable standards. Now, they are the same, well, all of these 8 are the same in the additions to contributing buildings, the additions to non-contributing buildings, and new construction. New construction has 3 additional ones, because when you're just making an addition, you're not starting with the front of the property. So new construction has a front that wasn't there before, so the front setback is an additional item, as well as the front width of the house and the front porch within depth. So let's look at what those are. Setbacks, we're talking about side setbacks. This was also in the strategy paper. The minimum side setback on each side is 5 feet in the design guidelines, but the cumulative setback is 15 feet. So you could have, if you're at least 5 feet on one side, you can have 10 feet on the other side, but those 2 numbers added up together need to be 15 feet. So that's explained, and we've got some graphics. And by the way, let me just tell you, for any of these measurable standards, if you do not like them and you want to propose something else, please send me an email. Tell me specifically what you don't like, why you don't like it, what you propose instead, and why you think that's going to be better. Because if you just say, I don't like it, that's not helpful, because, okay, and so what would we do? If you don't like stuff, please feel free to propose something else.
Yeah, just a quick question.
Yeah.
On this side setback, you have a 5-foot and a 10-foot, but if you can show us historically where there's never been a setback at 5 foot and 10 foot, because it's always been 3 foot.
So, and I'm going to answer this gentleman's question, and then I want you to hold your questions to the end so we can get through these, please. This is based on traditional building patterns where there was typically a house on one side, or a driveway on one side. And it's typical of conditions in the heights. Now, if you don't like that, you are welcome to send me that comment, or if you have a question, if you want to ask that at the end, I'll take it at the end.
But
Okay?
what I'm saying is there's no previous setback of 5 foot on one side and 10 foot on the other.
Sir, okay, hang on just a second. We are not going to do this cross-audience talking. Okay, and number 2, he has a right to ask the question, ask for information, and there's going to be no arguing with each other tonight. Sir, I will be happy to get back into this with you after we've gone through the rest of the standards. So hold on to that thought. All right. The next one I want to talk about is floor area ratio. I'm going to take you through some case studies, or a case study for this and lot coverage. Floor area ratio is a number that's calculated by the square footage of all the floors of your house. What's not included are front porches, whether they're screened in or not, unless it's like an enclosed sunroom kind of situation where you have walls and windows. In that case, it would be counted. as livable, that's the area you live in, it's within the home at that point. Okay, so we take the lot area, that's one of the numbers we need, and then we also need the first floor area and the second floor area. And we're gonna do algebra tonight, kids. For all of you who are like, I learned it once and will never have to use algebra again, this is where we're gonna do it. Okay, so first floor area in this example is 1,307 square feet. The second floor area is 1,280. That's the actual numbers that went into building this model, by the way. That's not just guessing or made up. The total building area, therefore, is 2,335. The total lot, 6. Oh, that's wrong. Noré. My consultant has furnished me with inaccurate information and bad math. Well, this is the way you would do the equation if you had the right numbers in it. And in this case, let's just pretend that the floor area ratio works out to be 0.35. That would fall under the maximum floor area ratio for a lot that's 6,600 square feet, which is 0.44. So I'm going to show you how that really works with real math, okay, that I did personally, so if it's wrong, it's my fault this time. All right, here's our little table. Here again, we can see if you have a 6,600 square foot lot, your floor area ratio max is 0.44. If your existing house is 1,800 square feet, pretty typical for one of the little bungalows, right? That does not include the 120 square foot open front porch. That's not included. You have a detached garage, which is 400 square feet. Currently, 250 square feet of that is exempt, so we don't count the first 250 square feet of your garage, your detached garage. The lot, 6,600 square feet. So you say, I want to add on to this house. How big can my addition be? So we start the maximum floor area ratio of 6,600 square feet times 0.44 from the table is 2,904 square feet. The garage is already 400 square feet, but we have exempted 250 square feet of that, so you have to include 150 square feet of the garage. So here's the math. The maximum FAR is the sum of the house plus the garage plus the addition. Now we're doing algebra. 2,904 square feet equals 1,800 square feet of the house plus 150 square feet of the garage plus X square feet of the addition, and we're going to solve for X, right? I mean, I know it's been a long time since 7th grade, but this is what we're doing. Now we're going to just put things over, so all the numbers we do know are on the same side of the equation, and we're solving for X. That means 2,904 minus 1,800 minus 150 equals X, and that equals 954 square feet maximum FAR for the addition in this specific situation.
So nobody's mentioned garage apartments or back porches?
Right, so if you have, it doesn't matter where your porch is, if your porch is not walled in with windows, if it's not a sunroom, it can be a screened-in porch, doesn't count in your FAR. No porches count in your FAR unless they are like sunrooms, right, where they're with walls and windows. If you have a screened-in porch, it doesn't count.
Where does it say that in the document? Because I don't see that in the document.
I can't answer that question right now, but if it doesn't say that in the document, it will. Yes, sir. Because it's part of so the gentleman asked, why do we care about the second floor? It's part of the overall massing. So we're going to get to, I think, what you're getting at when we talk about lot coverage next. So we really have two kinds of dimensions that govern the size of a building. The first one is lot coverage, and that's footprint. And then the second one is the massing, the volume of the house entirely, and that's what this floor area ratio deals with. Oh yes, sorry, thank you very much. So the gentleman asked about the room above the garage. If you have a garage with living space above, that living space above does get included in the floor area ratio. But let's say that you have an attic in your house and it's not tall enough to be considered habitable space, that doesn't get counted. So you're not penalized for having an attic, basically. Yes, sir. So this is a really good question. This gentleman said, is there going to be a ballot? And there is, the approval process for design guidelines does not include voting. It goes to the Historic Commission for a recommendation, and then it goes to City Council. That's the approval process that's set up in the ordinance.
Yeah, but it's something that affects something like my house where I have a huge garage apartment, I have a 3-car garage. I can only do 1,200 square foot house on Knights Boulevard. That's not right.
So this
We don't need to vote on it.
this gentleman says, well, that's unfair for me because of my specific situation. So here's what I'm going to tell you. All these FAR are based on a couple different things. Number one, what's already getting approved or not approved by the commission. And so everybody was complaining about predictability and consistency, and this reflects what is happening or what's getting approved and not based on our ordinance. We are putting together some numbers, and I guarantee you that it does not matter what numbers we come up with, y'all are not going to like them. There's no number that meets the requirements of the ordinance that we can have that everybody's going to be happy with, or that will not adversely affect somebody. The other thing is that these numbers are actually higher than what you all told us you were okay with in the survey. So when we sent out the survey, we had all those models, and we had people who said this is fine, 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 not fine. The tipping point for not fine is actually lower than these numbers. We've already increased it above what your neighbors said in the survey. So we can talk about the different numbers, and here again is what I would say. Sir, if you have a situation, you think this is unreasonable and I don't like it, please send me an email that tells me about your situation, explains how this would impact you, and what you want to do, and what's allowed and not allowed under these numbers, and then make a proposal of what you think an acceptable alternative should be. Because just saying I don't like it is not helpful to me in this situation. I need you to bring me some solutions if you think this is a problem. And so please, I would love to hear from all of you about how you want to handle that. You might say 250 square feet is not big enough, big enough exemption for a garage. And that's fine, you're welcome to propose that as well. So, but send me that information. That's fine, where I am taking your comments. And this is a draft, remember. This isn't the final thing. All right, we had a gentleman way back there. Okay. Sure. Yeah. So the gentleman's asking, have you compared this to what's being approved? Is this in line with what's getting approved now? And it is. And we've already checked it against the certificate of appropriateness applications that are being approved. And I'm sorry? I'm sorry, I can't. Nore, how far back did you go?
Those were really just the past couple of years.
Yeah, just the last couple of years is how far back we went on that. Now remember that the ordinance got changed in 2015 too, so we want to make sure that we're working with the rules that are in place now. Hold on. Oh, that's a really good question. So these are not, okay. All right, hang on. So the lady's question was, how long has the commission been using these guidelines? They haven't. These aren't adopted yet. These have not gone into effect yet. And that brings me to another point that I want to ask, and then I'm really going to ask you guys to stop asking me questions until we get done. The way that the approval process works is that this will go to the Historic Commission. That's a public hearing. You are welcome to come down. If you can't be there, that's fine. I understand it's during the day. Send your letters that say I like it or I don't like it. I'm already starting to get those. Those will all go to the commission. After that, it's going to go to the Quality of Life Committee for City Council. We'll take all your comments too, and those will also go to City Council as well. So you have a lot of opportunities to still make your voice heard with the next draft. Now, the implementation process. At some point, if this gets adopted, then it will go into effect, and we are going to have a little lag in the going into effect so that nobody gets caught in that middle gray area, demilitarized zone, no man's land kind of situation where they have a C of A in process, and then they're likely to, they're thinking, oh no, am I going to have to make changes? So we really want to make this as smooth a process as possible and also give us the opportunity to publicize this. I know I've sent you all a whole bunch of letters, you might have thrown them in the trash, but we're trying to get the word out so that nobody is caught unawares by this too. All right, I'm going on, you're all coming with me, and then we'll talk about some more questions. All right, so let's remember this. We're going to get back to it in a second, but we've done our calculation for floor area ratio. There's another calculation for lot coverage. It also has numbers based on the size of your lot. In this case, 40% lot coverage would apply. And we're just going to go right to the example. It's the same house, the same property. In this case, you have the 1,800 square foot house. The 120 foot front porch does count in lot coverage. It covers the lot. The detached garage has the same 250 square foot exemption. The lot is the same size. Working through the same algebra math, the addition, maximum lot coverage equals house plus garage plus addition. Oh, and I messed it up because I forgot to put in the 120 square feet. Okay, so we have the house that should include the porch and the garage and the addition. When we solve for X, that ends up being 570 square feet of footprint that you can add. So when you combine those things, because that's what's going to happen, right? You're trying to figure out how big can my addition be. We have to do the math for both of these things. Here's our situation, and remember, sorry, this is 570. The FAR can be 954. The lot coverage can be 570. And that means if we want to maximize our addition, it needs to be 2 stories. And then we go and look at all of our addition options that are more than 1 story, that are either on the back of the house or maybe encroach over the house a little bit, and that tells us what we can do. And then we say, okay, well, I see that I can do something. Let me talk to my design professional, who I'm going to require to look at these design guidelines before he charges me to make plans. And then I will see what is possible on my lot. But that's the process that people would be able to work through now with the design guidelines. Instead of saying, I want to have an addition, and everybody's saying, oh, let's see, I think this might be what we can do. We'll have to take it to staff, we'll have to take it to the commission and see what they say. Okay? We're just trying to make it predictable. There has to be some structure here. You may be in disagreement with the specific numbers that we've come up with, and if you are, suggest what you think those should be that are different, that you think would be compatible with contributing buildings in the historic district in your context area. I can tell you that the ordinance prohibits the design guidelines from being less strict than the ordinance itself. So when the ordinance says you have to be compatible in your addition, size and massing, with your neighboring contributing buildings, we have to abide by that. And that's also what these numbers reflect. Because we did all that data collection at the beginning. We know how big things are and how big those original buildings are. So let me work through the last couple ones, and then we'll do all of your questions. Okay, eave height. You may remember that when we talked about the design standards at our March meeting, if you were there were a lot more standards. There were a lot more. There was a maximum building height, there was rear setback, there was this thing called maximum building envelope, which you would have to build within, and we decided that that was too confusing, but also would be really hard for the public to use without having a design professional's help, and we don't want you to have to use a design professional to decide if you can do stuff. I mean, when you're at the back of the napkin planning stage. So we got rid of a whole bunch of those extra standards, including maximum building height, because this is really what's important here, that your eaves are in line generally with your neighbors. That's part of the scale and proportion compatibility that keeps a rhythm and a consistent look along a streetscape with those contributing buildings. I mean, there are buildings in the heights, and I'm sure you've seen them, where the porch of a building is at about mid first story with its neighbors because it's up so high. I mean, that's really not compatible with contributing buildings. So we want those to be the same scale, and having consistent eave heights is a really easy way to do that, and it's something that you can look at from the outside and see very clearly. All right, building wall plate height. A plate height is the distance from the finished floor to the top of that floor. It's the height of a floor, basically. And obviously, this isn't something that you would be able to see in an existing house, but you do plan for that in an addition. And the key here is that we don't want 15-foot plate heights, because that's also when you run into these houses that are gigantic, and it's officially 2-story, but it's 40 or 50 feet tall and really towering over its neighbors. All right, garage ridge height. You'll see that this takes into account the opportunity to have a garage apartment. We try to make it tall enough that you could build on top of that garage and have that extra living space above there. Okay, so this is really important. Side wall length. Why do we care about this? Traditionally, 1-story houses were about 40 to 45 feet long. That's what you see here in the heights with contributing buildings. They're generally in that range for 1-story houses. 2-story houses are a little bit shorter, actually. So what we've done is actually make that longer before you have to jog that wall in. And this is why. If you have a wall that just goes straight back for 70 feet, that is really monolithic. And from the street, it just looks even bigger and more monolithic than it is, and to your neighbors as well. So when you have a little jog in there, it gives you the impression, even if it's not the case, that the house is really a traditional length. So we've bumped it up to 50 feet, which is, again, 5 to 10 feet longer for a 1-story house, and to 40 feet for a 2-story house. And that's not the maximum length, that's just before you have to jog in. You only have to bring that wall in 1.5 feet, and after 6 feet of that, you can go right back out. That's enough visually to create the effect of having a traditionally sized sidewall. All right, so we're trying to find workable solutions to this stuff that still preserves the character of the historic district. Porch eave height, this is again the same thing with eaves. You want it to be consistent across the contributing buildings, so you have that rhythm and streetscape, et cetera. Front setback, obviously this, now we're getting into the things that only apply to new construction. Front setback is one of them. It needs to be in the front setback range. So the first thing that this says is that in your context area, which is the block face that you're on and the opposing block face, you want to be consistent with the setback range there, and that means that if you're in a part of town where the setback is greater, it can be that. Then we have the 5 foot and 15 foot show up here also. I'm not sure why, because that's side setbacks, we'll deal with that. Front wall width and offsets. This is very similar to side wall with an offsets. If you have a front wall, they were traditionally not 50 feet wide. They were traditionally smaller, and it's the same thing. You can have that front wall, and then if you want it to be a little bit wider, it just needs to jog a little bit. But there are maximums too, and that reflects the setback, the side setback ranges. unless you have like a gigantic house. Let's say your lot is 50 feet or less. The widest your house could be is 35 feet because of the side setbacks. If your lot is bigger than 50 feet wide, we've established a 50-foot width as the maximum, but you still have the side setbacks to deal with. So if you had a really, really gigantic lot, 50 feet would still be as wide as you could go. All right, and then porch width and depth. This is primarily because front porches are traditional on these houses in this district, but what you don't want is what looks like a fake porch. You know, like how they have like little fake balconies that aren't really balconies sometimes on a second floor. You don't want to have a porch that's like 2 feet deep where it's, you know, it looks like a porch, but it's not a usable porch. So porches need to be 6 feet deep so they're functional. That's traditional, and then a minimum width of 50% of the house. Okay? And then those are all of the measurable standards. We're going to get back to those in just a minute. We want to tell you we do have this reload and demo section. These are all based on the criteria in the ordinance. So what you will see in the design standards are the criteria for your easy reference. And then we have referred to a bunch of the criteria as we go through in the design guidelines where we thought that would be helpful. So we'll say if you think there are areas where we should make more clear connections between the criteria in the ordinance and the specific guidelines, please let us know, because that would be good for me to know as well. And then these additional resources, we already talked about that. One of the things we have in there are what we call best practices. These are not things that are regulated, but they're things that we get questions on sometimes, like what kind of fence is appropriate in my historic district? Well, I mean, you can do whatever you want, but because we don't regulate that. But if you were seeking guidance, here's what is typical. Let's see, I think what else? We don't regulate landscaping, of course. Some people ask about what color of paint is appropriate. So we have some suggestions, but these are, again, just suggestions. This section is not part of the binding decision-making process. It's just helpful information based on the kind of questions we get so that people have everything in one place. Our next steps are that we're collecting comments. Again, the comments for this draft are due by the 30th, the end of the month, to me. This is how you get a hold of me. My cards are at the table also with all this information. You can send me a letter. It just takes a while for them to get to me. So if you're going to send a letter, please do that right away. Don't wait until the last minute. Email, of course, is immediate. Again, if you want to call me to ask questions, I'm happy to answer your questions. Please do not call me to give comments, because I want to have your comments in your words that accurately capture your thoughts. It's very difficult for me to take notes accurately enough to convey what you're trying to say. So please send me your comments in writing, but I'm happy to answer questions all day, every day, to get your questions asked.
Where will this PowerPoint be posted?
The PowerPoint is going to be posted on our project web page. That is on the handout that's at the front table. I brought 150 copies, so there should be enough. You can pick those up on your way out. There's a project web page that's just for this project, and it has everything that we've done in this project so far. So you can go back and look through all the videos for our previous meetings are there. All the previous products and documents are there. You can look through the whole thing. I'm sure that would be scintillating and your favorite way to spend the weekend, but it is there if you want to see it. If you have any questions about any of that material that is old, you're also welcome, of course, to call me and ask. All right.
How many pages is that design guidelines?
The design guidelines is 182 pages long document. But here's the thing, you do not need the whole thing. So if you're planning a project, it's not going to be an addition to a contributing building and an alteration to a contributing building and an alteration to a non-contributing building and new construction and relo or demo, right? It's going to be maybe 2 or 3 of those things at most. So you either have a contributing building or a non-contributing building, or you're doing new construction. So you would just have to use the sections that you wanted, and we've provided it on the website in individual sections so that you can download just what you want. All right, now, just for a second, because this is where I know some people are starting to leave, so I want to thank everybody for coming. We are going to get to questions and answers, but I do want to thank you all for coming out on a weeknight. I appreciate it.